And when that happens, there will be this horrific experience with Antiochus Epiphanes, who is a picture of the future Antichrist. So Daniel chapter 11, there's a lot to cover. Just in the first 35 verses out of, I think, the 45, there is an estimated 135 prophecies. So we're not going to dig into every single piece of that, but we will give you a hefty overview, which is why you have the handout, and that will also be posted with the recording. So let's get right into it and not waste time. So Daniel is having a vision. A heavenly being is giving him a vision. And what this chapter is going to cover really is what happens after Daniel's gone. Daniel's recording the future. He's getting a vision from an angel that's giving him the future. Both the near future, it basically covers the entire intertestamental period. And then the ultimate future that will arise in the end times. So it's really broken up into two sections. That which covers the intertestamental period, that's the first 30 to 35 verses. And then the following end of it is covering how that foreshadows the ultimate end. So, verse 1. Also in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I, stood up to confirm and strengthen him. I remember a heavenly being is speaking to Daniel. So this is the heavenly being saying, he strengthened Daniel to help him through this difficult vision that he's experiencing. And now I'll tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up against the realm of Greece. So right now, Daniel is living in Persia. Darius is the governor or king over the region that Daniel lives in, but Cyrus is the king over all of the kingdom. So Cyrus is the current king, and so he's telling Daniel there will be 3 more kings and then a 4th. When you get to that 4th king, he's going to be the richest both in material wealth and in army, and he's going to stir up trouble with Greece. Which, by the way, this is exactly what happened. After Cyrus, there was Cambyses, Pseudo-Smerdis, and Darius the First. And then the 4th king was Xerxes. In Scripture, he's called Ahasuerus. He is the king from the book of Esther. And he happened to be the wealthiest king in the Persian kingdom's history. He also happened to amass the largest army in ancient history. So it's exactly what Daniel predicted. And he took the largest army ever assembled and attacked Greece as they were on the rise. And he failed. So he attacked the Grecian Empire with the largest army ever assembled and then failed. Which, if you have been following along Daniel, that actually is to be expected because the Persian Empire would not last forever. It was supposed to be taken over by the Greeks, specifically named in a previous chapter of the book of Daniel. And so he predicts exactly from his lifetime what would be coming. 3 more kings, then the richest one, Xerxes. He would amass the world's largest army and fail because he attacks Greece. That's exactly what went down. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. And when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not among his posterity, nor according to his dominion, with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be uprooted even for others besides these. Well, that great mighty king that's spoken of here is Alexander the Great, the king of Greece. He came and he took over the Persians. And just as we've talked about throughout this book, when Alexander the Great dies, his kingdom gets separated up among his 4 generals, because when he's on his deathbed, he says, "Give my kingdom to the strong." And that's what happens. They fight for his kingdom and they take it. The 4 generals. He has kids, but it's not given to his kids. It's given over to the generals. And they basically break the kingdom up into 4 pieces over the areas that they rule. So it's just exactly what's predicted here. You have Seleucus taking over the area of Syria and Mesopotamia, Ptolemy taking over the area of Egypt and northern Africa, Lysimachus over Thrace and Asia Minor, and Cassander takes over the area of Macedonia and Greece. Now, for the rest of what we'll be dealing with here, we'll be dealing with the Ptolemaic Empire and the Seleucid Empire. Because if you notice where they sit in the map that I gave you, what's right in between them, or the disputed land between them, is the nation of Israel. And that's what the prophecies are focused on. This is a prophecy to the people of Israel. And so it is the dispute between those 2 empires and their constant warring back and forth, trying to gain the upper hand on each other, that Israel is stuck in the middle of. So when it says warnings to the kings of the north and the south, or we're dealing with a king from the south and the north, the southern king is the Ptolemaic Empire. The northern king is the Syrian or Seleucid Empire. So also the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. Well, here's what's really interesting. I mean, Daniel, the amount of detail that he has is unreal. I mean, God tells us that he knows the beginning from the end, or the end from the beginning. And it's detailed, laid out here in Daniel 11, how inspired this is by God. It says here that the southern king from the area of Egypt, or Ptolemy, that he will grow really strong. Well, when the kingdom started to get divided after Alexander the Great, Ptolemy became basically the most powerful of the generals that broke up. And he initially controlled, the whole massive area. And he was the king of the south. But Seleucus the first was serving under Ptolemy as a satrap or a governor or a prince. Yet, he used his influence as a governor or satrap to gain influence with the troops, and his political and military influence allowed him to revolt against Ptolemy and create the Seleucid Empire in the north. So he broke off from Ptolemy, which is exactly what was predicted. It said that one of the princes of the southern king will become strong, gain power, and then have dominion. That's exactly what happened. At the end of some years, they shall join forces. For the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of her authority, and neither he nor his authority shall stand. But she shall be given up with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. So this is really talking about like a 40-year period, or 40 years later. There's this interesting thing that happens. Ptolemy II, so the next generation of rulers of these 2 empires that are fighting from the north and the south, with Israel in the middle, they decide that this next generation, 40 years later, that they want to have some sort of political alliance. Like, let's get back together, let's get on the same page. So Ptolemy in the south sends his daughter Berenice to marry Antiochus II. So they get married as a way to, as a symbol for their unification, their political alliance. And Ptolemy is thinking, if I do that, that gives me a foothold, as my relative is now royalty in the northern kingdom. Well, in this whole soap opera of things that's happening, where Ptolemy sends his daughter Berenice to marry Antiochus, Antiochus is already married to a woman named Laodice. He divorces Laodice to marry Berenice. Of course, he marries her until Ptolemy II dies. Then he divorces Berenice and then remarries Laodice. And everyone is upset with everybody. So it's all kinds of soap opera drama that's happening between these two empires, and the marriages and the treaties and the alliances are being broken because he breaks off the alliance as soon as Ptolemy is dead. But Laodice is also not happy. Even though she gets her position back, she spends that time that she was divorced from Antiochus plotting, because she's upset that she's been removed from the palace for the sake of this military and political alliance. And in that time, when she comes back into the palace and she remarries Antiochus, she poisons Antiochus and Berenice to make sure that nobody else has access to the throne. And then she places her own son on the throne in Seleucus III, so that her descendants are the one ruling in the Northern Empire. So all kinds of intrigue and political drama happening. From a branch of her roots, one shall arise in his place, who shall come with an army, enter the fortress of her king of the north, and deal with them and prevail. And he shall also carry their gods captive to Egypt, with their princes and their precious articles of silver and gold. And he shall continue more years than the king of the south. So when it's saying the roots, all right, so a branch from her roots, this is talking about Berenice, the daughter of the southern king. Her roots would be her father, Ptolemy II, and a branch from her roots would be her brother, Ptolemy III. He takes the throne in the southern kingdom because of all of the stuff that's gone down. All right. He invades Syria because of the murder of his sister Berenice and kills Laodice. So now everybody's dead. They plunder the land. And because of all of the things that have gone down, Ptolemy III and Seleucus III start their reign in the exact same year. So their reigns, all of the drama from the past has sort of been, through political intrigue, divorce, remarriage, poison, murder, invasion, they're all gone. Now Ptolemy III and Seleucus III are reigning at the same time. And it says here that one would continue more years than the other. So it says the southern king would continue more years than the king of the north. So Ptolemy III and Seleucus III start their reign at the same time, but that Ptolemy's would last longer than Seleucids. That's exactly what happened. Also, the king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the south, but shall return to his own land. Seleucus III did. He was upset with everything that's gone on. He mounts an attack against Egypt, against the Ptolemaic Empire, and fails around 240 BC. So he tucks his tail and returns home. 10. However, his sons shall stir up strife and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through. Then he shall return to his fortress and stir up strife. Seleucus III, so it's his sons, they're going to stir up strife. So Seleucus III, or second, whatever, his sons are now going to mess with everybody. So Seleucus III, he has two sons. He names them Seleucus, shocker, and Antiochus III, which is Antiochus the Great. And it says here that these two sons are going to stir up strife and assemble a multitude of great forces. Yet one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through. Then he shall return his fortress and stir up. So it's saying that Seleucus III is going to have something happen with his sons, and then one of them is going to take power. And he's also going to create all kinds of conflict. Well, that's exactly what happens. He has two kids, Seleucus IV, Antiochus III, or he's known in history as Antiochus the Great. Seleucus, his brother, is murdered, and Antiochus the Great becomes king in his place, and he successfully invades Egypt, which is exactly what was predicted in verse 11. Or verse 10, sorry. Verse 11, the king of the south shall be moved with rage. Of course, he just lost a battle to the northern kingdom. And go out and fight with him with the king of the north, who shall muster a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into the hand of his enemy. When he has taken away the multitude, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail. At this time, the king of the south is Ptolemy the Fourth, who is sometimes called Philopator, and the king of the north is Antiochus the Great. There's this famous battle at Raphia. Ptolemy and Antiochus gathered huge armies, around 70,000 soldiers on each side, and there were also elephants and other stuff. The Egyptian army ends up devastated, or they devastate the Syrian army. Antiochus narrowly escapes, but Ptolemy decides not to chase him down. He wins the battle, but doesn't pursue. Antiochus, however, kind of upset about this, which, in politics, especially in ancient warlords, not real shocking. So in verse 13 it says, the king of the north will return, that's Antiochus the Great, and muster a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great army and much equipment. Now in these times many shall rise up against the king of the south. Also violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fall. So 14 years later, Antiochus the Great does exactly that. He amasses a massive army, not just from the Syrian Empire, but he gathers people from Macedonia and from Egypt and from the Jews, which is exactly what's stated there in verse 14. It says, and many times shall rise up against the king of the south also violent men of your people. He's speaking to Daniel. Your people would be the Jews. And so the Jews are basically under the thumb of the Ptolemaic Empire right now. And they're aligning with Antiochus the Great to get rid of this sort of oppression. They view him as sort of a way to get out of this struggle that they're in, almost as a way to be freed. Unfortunately, this will lead to a lot of disaster. This sort of team up with Antiochus the Great will lead to one of the biggest tragedies in the history of the Jewish people. So the king, in verse 15, of the north shall come and build a siege mound. Take a fortified city, the forces of the south shall not withstand him. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist. But he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him. He shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power. So at this point, Ptolemy Philopator, he's dead. He's replaced by his child, Ptolemy the Fifth. He was far too young to rule effectively. So the Egyptian army that ends up being led by their general, his name is Scopas, to a place called Paneas. Scopas retreats to the fortified city of Sidon. 3 other Egyptian generals, Europus, Menecles, and Damaenas, all failed in their attempts to rescue Scopas from their onslaught and failed fulfilling the portion of even the choice troops shall have no strength to resist. So basically, exactly what's predicted here. The king is too young. A general helps him out. He ends up being secluded in an area and wiped out. No one can help him. Even the greatest troops have no ability to resist, which is exactly what's stated. Antiochus prevails. He takes over land all the way to Gaza, which previously belonged to the Ptolemaic Empire, which now means the Seleucid Empire has crossed the boundary and they've taken over the Holy Land. So this war that's waging between these two empires with Israel in the middle has now flip-flopped in its who controls it. Egypt no longer has control, Syria does, if that helps. In verse 17, it says, he shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus he shall do, and he shall give him the daughter of women to destroy it. But she shall not stand with him or be with him. So just like earlier in the history of this drama, there was a marriage union between the two kingdoms to try to bring an alliance. And the thinking behind that is, if I send my daughter to this kingdom, I now have a foothold in it. Even though that failed, history rhymes, and they try it again. So Antiochus the Great gives his daughter, Cleopatra the First, It's probably not the famous Cleopatra you're thinking of, but Cleopatra the First to be the wife of Ptolemy the Fifth. This is a peace pact in an attempt to gain influence over Egypt, because now they have more control. They're kind of on the weightier end of this division. The problem is Cleopatra decides that she wants to side with her husband, not her father. So this whole plan disintegrates into nothing. After this, this is verse 18, he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall take many, but a ruler shall bring the reproach against them to an end. With the reproach removed, he shall turn back on him. Then he shall turn his face toward the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fail and not be found. So it's talking about this. After this plan fails, he's going to try now in the coastlands, and he's going to fail there. This is Antiochus the Great. So Antiochus, he turns and moves to the coastlands, to the Mediterranean Sea. He tries to march toward Rome, which at this point in time in history is growing in strength. Antiochus gains land until he comes in contact with the Roman general Lucius Scipio Asiaticus, who defeats Antiochus the Great at Magnesia. Then Rome forced Antiochus to pay a ridiculous tax of 12,000 talents, and this would be equivalent to tens of billion dollars at modern rates. So Antiochus loses this battle. It's a big deal. He now owes money to Rome. He's failed in Egypt. He's failed in the coastlands, but the Syrian Empire is still existing. Antiochus the Great's youngest son is actually taken hostage to Rome before he's allowed to leave. This is actually where we get the story of drawing a line in the sand. So this is in the intertestamental period. The general here, when Antiochus is trying to move towards Rome, he draws a circle around him in the sand and says, "You're not allowed to leave the circle until you give me your decision." And that's about whether or not he's going to retreat and pay the tax. And ultimately, he's left humiliated. And his son is taken hostage into Rome. And he now owes this massive tax to the Romans as he's failing and growing his empire towards Egypt as well. So that's where we're at. After this, he's in severe debt to the Romans. So on his way back, he raids the temple of Jupiter in the city of Elam, and the people revolt, and Antiochus dies raiding his own people. So he actually tries to raid a temple, a pagan temple, and in doing so, he gets caught, and his very own people revolt. He dies, and now there's a new person on the throne. So there shall arise in his place one who imposes, this is verse 20, taxes on the glorious kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or in battle. So his son, Seleucus IV, ends up being someone who taxes the people like crazy, basically because he's left with his father's debt. His father got destroyed trying to raid his own people. So now his son is left trying to pay this debt to the Romans, and with all of this political upheaval. And so he's basically only known for how cruel he was in taxation. And he only rules for 12 years, which is a very short period of time compared to his father's reign. And he even sends a guy named Heliodorus to raid the Jewish temple, but ultimately fails. He's trying to raid the Jewish temple to take what treasure he can to pay back the Romans. His reign only lasts for 12 years as opposed to his father's 37 years. He was not killed in battle, but instead he was actually poisoned by Heliodorus, the guy he sent to raid the Jewish temple. This act of treason by Heliodorus does not work out the way he thinks it will when he takes out Seleucus. It says, "In his place shall arise a vile person to whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue." Now, this is now where we get the character of Antiochus Epiphanes, who is a major figure in Jewish history because of how cruel he was, and is the result of this kind of treaty they made with Antiochus III, or Antiochus the Great. So up through verse 35, this is basically who we're going to be focusing on. His name's Antiochus IV, or Antiochus Epiphanes is what he called himself. That basically means he believes he's like God on earth. He's the youngest son of Antiochus the Great. He's the guy who was taken captive to Rome. So remember that. After 14 years in Rome, he probably learned a whole lot about the political schemes and intrigue and skills. While he's in Rome, his brother dies, who's ruling the empire. He arranges a prisoner exchange. He gets himself out of prison from Rome. His brother's son, Demetrius, who would have been heir to the kingdom, gets exchanged. So the person who would have been the king gets now imprisoned in Rome. Antiochus Epiphanes goes back home. And this is what he does. Shortly after Heliodorus kills Seleucus IV, there is now a power vacuum in the Syrian Empire. Antiochus makes deals with all of the neighboring kingdoms. And what he does is he says that he's going to mentor his nephew. Because one nephew is in prison, but the other nephew would be the one who would take the throne after his father died. And so what he does is he works these treaties out with neighboring kingdoms and says, here, my nephew will be the king. I'm adopting him, and I'm going to mentor him to rule. And so people make treaties with him with this in mind, and he's using this to usurp power. He ends up murdering his nephew. After he claims himself co-regent, he murders him so that he can take the throne himself. So he enters in by creating a prisoner exchange and then a peace deal with all of the neighboring nations, stating he's going to mentor his nephew. So he is this sort of peace talker. He doesn't he's not given the throne legitimately, and he doesn't win it through battle. He takes it through intrigue and political backstabbing and using peace talks to get people to agree with him and give him the power to just do that one backstabbing thing where he murders his nephew to take the throne. That's the beginning of Antiochus's political career. It only gets worse. Verse 22, with the force of a flood they shall be swept away before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. And after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. Antiochus IV, or Antiochus Epiphanes, he basically sweeps away those who reject him as king. And then in his first year as king, he replaces the high priest of the Jewish people and appoints his own high priest, basically to reprogram their culture. He sets his own high priest in the temple so that it would be politically advantageous to him with part of the kingdom that he now controls. This changing of the tide and political shift was not a majority. He did it with a few number of people. This is actually important and applicable to us today. Political movements and political change and upheaval and revolutions, they don't happen with a majority of people. They happen with a minority who's willing to be active and loud. The Revolutionary War happened with most people just wanting to be left alone to run their farm. Not that that didn't have good results. The Civil War, same thing. But these types of things happen with a small number of people who are politically active. And so it goes to show that history is made by those who are willing to get involved. And a loud minority can have more power than a silent majority. So think about what kind of ramifications that can have in our own homes. He shall enter peaceably, even to the richest places of the province. He shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches. He shall devise his plans among the strongholds, but only for a time. Remember that phrase, but only for a time. So this is likely something that he learns in Rome. What he does is he taxes the wealthy and disperses the small amount of that to the poor people. Enough, basically, to make them feel like he's advantageous to them politically to gain their favor, but not enough to make them independent. Enough so that they favor him, but they're still dependent on him as the ruler of the government. So he becomes favored. He pays his military really well because he doesn't want those who have military might and power to turn against him, and then he basically keeps the rest for himself. So he makes himself super wealthy. He gains the favor of the poorest by making them have just enough so that they're dependent on the government, but he gives way more than previous rulers who are completely oppressive, or at least oppressive in full frontal oppressive, like not hiding it at all, so that they become dependent on him, so they can't really revolt against him. And his military is paid well. This is real political intrigue, and by the way, not much has changed. It's kind of regular practice. So the phrase, but only for a time, is important to remember that, one, no matter how dark the world gets, a Savior's coming. The Redeemer is coming. Verse 25, he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army, and the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a great and mighty army, but he shall not stand. For they shall devise plans against him, yet those who eat of the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. So this is 170 BC. Antiochus IV attacks Egypt, and he conquers a lot of their territory. At this time, Ptolemy IV gets really bad counsel, and the military advice that he gets leads to this defeat. Basically, Antiochus never attacks Alexandria, but the military advice that Ptolemy got, the southern king, was to protect Alexandria. So all of their forces go to Alexandria, and that's the place that he leaves alone. So he ends up winning a lot of the battle because of the bad advice that he gets. And then when he tries to escape, he gets captured, Ptolemy in the south. These kings, verse 27, both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper. For the end will still be at the appointed time. So Antiochus Epiphanes, after this, he makes a deal with Ptolemy to rule in Memphis under Antiochus's influence. So he takes an area that he's conquered, and he gives it back to the southern king, only if he acts as sort of a vassal king for Antiochus, as a way of saving face for him in some way. Ptolemy betrays that trust, of course, because nothing ever goes as planned in these dramatic events. He betrays that trust and attempts to work with his brother, who's reigning in Alexandria. That all falls apart as they're all plotting against each other. And so basically, every political plan and military strategy fails among all of them because everyone's corrupt and seeking absolute power, so nobody trusts anybody. While returning to this land, in verse 28, with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant. So he shall do damage and return to his own land. So Antiochus the Great, or Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus the Great is a different guy. Antiochus Epiphanes not only opposed the Jewish people, but also Judaism. He's angry, and he strips gold from the temple. He steals temple instruments. He kills about 80,000 Jewish people, enslaves 40,000 of them, and takes another 40,000 prisoner. So when things fall apart in his battle with Egypt, he's angry and frustrated, and in his march back home is Israel, and he takes it all out on them. That's when he starts to go real crazy. It says in verse 29, at the appointed time he shall return and go toward the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. For ships from Cyprus shall come against him. He shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. So this is a couple years later. Antiochus marches back towards Alexandria against Egypt. But on the way, he meets up with a Roman general. This Roman general gives him an ultimatum to turn back, and if he doesn't, he's declaring war against Rome. And so now he turns back angry, and he's humiliated. So he's humiliated, angry, tyrant, psychopath. And on his way back from Egypt is Israel. This is where he goes nuts. Verse 31. All forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. Those who do wickedly against the covenant he shall corrupt with flattery, but the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. So we're told here that Antiochus Epiphanes is the one who gives us the model of the abomination of desolation. This is what he does when he's taking out all of his anger on the people he hates, the Jews. He treats the Jews horribly. He outlaws the Torah. He places a statue of Zeus in the Holy of Holies. With the statue of Zeus has Antiochus's face carved into it. He sacrifices a pig on the bronze altar and forces them to eat the unclean meat. Then he outlaws the daily sacrifices. This is that act of the abomination of desolation. He declares himself God. He puts up an idol of himself in the temple, claiming that he is God on earth, just like we expect the future Antichrist to do. And he ends the daily sacrifices. And in the midst of that, he sacrifices a pig and forces the Jews to eat the unclean meat. This does, however, kick off what's called the Maccabean revolt. The Maccabean revolt was led by a guy named Judas Maccabeus. He led a revolt against Antiochus Epiphanes. He waged an army, got together and fought back against Antiochus, and they ended up taking the temple and their land back for a period of time. This is, when they do this, they need to rededicate the temple. This is the story of Hanukkah. So after they defeat him and they need to rededicate the temple, they light the lamp inside the holy place. But there's only enough oil to last for one day, and it takes about 8 days to make more oil to be sufficient. However, when they light the oil menorah in the temple, that's supposed to be continuously lit always, because it's the only source of light inside the holy place. That light lasts for 8 days until they make a new batch and are able to continue to keep the menorah lit. So that's the story of Hanukkah. That's really what they're celebrating, is this conquered victory over Antiochus and then the rededication of the temple. Now it says here in verse 33, and these people who understand shall instruct many. Yet for many days they shall fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity and plundering. Now when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help, but many shall join them by intrigue. And some of those understanding shall fall to refine them, purify them, and make them white until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time. So this is telling us that the end is still to come, and there's still things that have to do with future prophecies that parallel the end times, which is what Revelation is about. So that's the first portion of this chapter. Here's the big picture. I know a lot of that information was confusing, and I don't expect you to remember every piece of history. So here's the big picture. Persia's time is running out. Greece is coming. The leader of Greece is Alexander the Great. His kingdom will be split into 4. 2 of those kingdoms will rule over the areas of Egypt and Syria, Ptolemy and Seleucid. They will wage war against each other for a long time, basically until the Seleucid Empire overtakes the land of Israel. And when that happens, there will be this horrific experience with Antiochus Epiphanes, who is a picture of the future Antichrist. That's the detail. That's the big picture of what's detailed throughout that time frame. Now I'm going to try to finish really quickly, if we can. So the next verse, verse 36, it says, then, so now we're in a different time, because we just got mentioned in verse 35 that we're dealing with the end time now. This is the things for the time of the end. Then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished. For what has been determined shall be done. So we know he's going to speak blasphemies. That's in line with other passages from Daniel, along with passages from Revelation about what the Antichrist will be like. Verse 37, he shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall exalt himself above them all. Now this is an intriguing verse because it tells us whoever this guy is in the future, that he's going to depart from the God of his fathers, meaning there is some sort of religious heritage that he's connected to. There is an expectation or conjecture about whether or not this is related to Islamic eschatology, like the Mahdi, or if this is connected to maybe the historicist view of Revelation, where they think this might have something to do with papal authority. Um, Honestly, I have no idea. These are all sorts of conjecture things. It could be any of that, could be related to Judaism, could be related to Christianity. There is some interesting connections between Islamic eschatology and Christian eschatology, in that basically the Mahdi, the messianic figure, they call Jesus the Messiah, but uh, the Mahdi, the next arrival of him, uh, when he comes, his description, he'll make a 7-year covenant with the Jews. He'll, gain lots of, he'll work through peace. He'll come in a way that wage war against the world. He sounds a whole lot similar to the Christian Antichrist, the Mahdi of Islam. But whether or not these things are connected, I have no idea. It's possible. Let's leave it at that. In verses 38 and 39, it says, "In their place he shall honor a god of fortresses, and a god which his fathers did not know he shall honor with gold and silver and with precious stones and pleasant things. Thus he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory. And he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain." It seems like what he really worship or will worship will be power. And in that essence, it almost seems like the indwelling or connection to Satan might be present here in this verse, because it's very similar to the temptation that was offered Jesus in the desert when he was fasting for 40 days. I'll let you have rule over all of this if all you do is bow down and worship me. So if he is replacing the God of his fathers with a foreign God, but he receives power over the whole earth, that is very similar to the type of temptation that Jesus was offered. So this could be part of the satanic connection to the Antichrist. In verse 40 and 41, "At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, with many ships. And he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. He shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape from his hand: Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon." So as he gains this sort of world power and he enters into the area of Jerusalem, the countries that seem to escape his grip are Edom, Moab, and Ammon, which interestingly is modern day Jordan. So that might be a place of refuge when in Matthew 24 it tells him, when you see the abomination of desolation, flee to the wilderness as a place of safe haven. That might be the very area in Jordan, which is why some people think Petra is that place of sanctuary during the tribulation period for the Jewish people. "He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many." There's some sort of battle or thing that's going to take place here in waging war. One of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse is war that's followed by famine and death. Maybe it's related to that. It could be connected to the battle of Ezekiel 38, because the timing of that invasion is unknown, whether that's before, during, or at the end of the tribulation period. We don't really know, but we do know that these countries seem to be connected to that description in Ezekiel 38. And then the conclusion here: "He shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him." So this leader will plant his tents between the seas, so Mediterranean and the Red Sea, uh, on the holy mountain, Jerusalem. So that's almost like the image of the beast that's set up in the temple. But he's going to come to an end. His reign will end. This is really, and no one will help him. This is really talking about the return of Christ. ending the reign of the Antichrist and bringing in the time of the millennial kingdom. So we'll look quickly at that description in Revelation 19, because remember in verse 24 it said only for a time, because evil doesn't last forever. God will redeem everything. So this is Christ's return in Revelation 19, starting in verse 11. Now I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on him was called Faithful and True. And in his righteousness he judges and makes war. His eyes were like a flame of fire, and his head were many crowns. He had a name written that no one knew except himself. He was clothed with a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, followed him on white horses. Now out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, that with it he should strike the nations, and he himself will rule them with a rod of iron. He himself treads the winepress in the fierceness of wrath of Almighty God, and he has on his robe and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The beast and his armies are now defeated, starting in verse 17. I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the birds that fly in the midst of heaven, Come and gather together for the supper of the great God, that you may eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captains, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses, and those who sit on them, and the flesh of all the people, free and slave, both small and great. And I saw the beast, the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered together to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army. The beast was captured, and with him the false prophet who works signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his image. These two were cast alive into the lake of fire burning with brimstone, and the rest were killed with the sword, which proceeded from the mouth of him who sat on the horse, and all the birds were filled with their flesh. This is a gruesome description of the return of Christ, because when he returns, evil's defeated. He destroys the Antichrist, the false prophet, and their armies, and all who follow him, and they're cast into darkness, and Christ's kingdom reigns. And you get that glorious vision of the millennial kingdom that will usher in eternity. That millennial kingdom where the earth itself is redeemed, and this great kingdom that we all get to be a part of, serving and reigning in with him as the earth gets fixed and is brought back to more of an Edenic-like state, because Christ is reigning from Jerusalem on the Davidic throne, keeping the promise that God made to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and David. Let's pray.